Terminal window and command syntax. In this particular section of the course, we begin to open up the terminal window. The terminal window is the environment that we'll be working in most of the time in this course because typically a Linux and a Unix system are managed from the command line predominantly, even though we have a well-developed GUI, especially if you're using the system in a server type role. Now, first of all, how do we get a terminal started up? Different ways, but we can start by simply going to the dash home button and selecting it. In my case, recently I've used a terminal on this machine, but if you did not see a terminal here, you can simply type in terminal and you should see it come up in display. The UXterm and Xterm are different types of programs that are not going to do what we want them to do in this particular case. So select terminal and you'll see the GUI terminal window come up. Now what is actually happening here is we have a program called the bash shell. Again, a program called the bash shell running inside of this GUI window. Sometimes people refer to it simply as the shell, but the program specifically is referred to as bash. We have a bash shell running inside of this particular GUI window, but we can also run a bash shell without any GUI environment whatsoever. This is called a virtual terminal. With a certain keystroke, in my case, I've done a function Alt-Shift-F1. Yours may vary slightly depending upon what type of virtual machine you're working with. If you simply had a desktop machine, you would simply do an Alt F1, and this would take you to the first virtual terminal. But again, if you're working in a virtual environment, you may have to add an additional keystroke to that. So here, I've started up another bash shell environment, and it's waiting for me to log in. Notice I know it is the first terminal environment because I see a TTY1. And that one indicates I'm at the first virtual terminal. Again, we do that with an Alt F1 if I'm using a simple standalone Linux system. If you're working in a virtual machine, you may have to pass an Alt and Shift F1 or another similar keystroke. I'll go ahead and log in as a user on this machine. And now I've just logged in as jsmith1234. Now, I'm also still logged in as myself inside the GUI. This is a little different concept than most people are used to dealing with. But again, what we have here is two bash shells open, or two terminals open, in different locations coming from the system. We have one open inside of this Unity shell, inside the GUI. And again, if we switch back to our first virtual terminal, we have a shell running here, but it is not running inside of a GUI environment. There are 6 of these virtual terminals that are created for you on a Linux system, or specifically on an Ubuntu system. Most Linux distributions also come with 6 pre-configured virtual terminals. So I can also go to the second virtual terminal. Notice at the top it says TTY2, all the way up to virtual terminal 6, and now we see that that's changed to a 6. To get back to my GUI environment, it's the Alt F7 if you're on a standalone machine, but perhaps an Alt function Shift F7 if you're in a virtual machine. Now, having said this, again, we've got a bash shell environment, a terminal window, as people often call it. But what is a terminal window? This acts as a command interpreter. So it takes the commands that we type in, it interprets them for the system, and provides the feedback or the result of the command. So for example, if I type in the command date and hit enter, the shell environment or the terminal here interpreted the date command, passed it off to the operating system, and then the operating system responded with the appropriate output. In this case, obviously, it's just a date and a time currently on the system. Now, we call, obviously, date is the command, and this information is what we refer to as the output of the command. Okay? One of the things to remember as you begin to get into the terminal environment in a Linux or Unix system is that it is case sensitive. So for example, if I type in DATE with a capital D and hit enter, it tells me that the command is not there. There is no command date found. Well, we typed in DATE before with a lowercase d. However, unlike Windows in a Unix or Linux system, things are case sensitive. So to a Unix system or to a Linux system, the capital D date command is something totally different than the lowercase date command. Another command that you'll be using in this particular section is the df command. It gives you information about the space utilization on the system. When you see this /dev SDA1, and we'll get into explaining exactly what all this means in later sessions, but when you see this dev SDA1, this is the first hard drive's first partition on the system. What you see here, for example, in the third column, is how much space is used, how much space is available, and what is the percentage of usage. So we've used about 20% of this disk space at this point in time for this installation. Now, what I've done here is I've taken a command and I've added an option to it. An option changes in some way, shape, or form the output or the function of the command. In this particular case, the df command used with the -h option. The -h option stands for human readable. In this case, what it has done, it has altered the output slightly to put it in a little more human-friendly standpoint. So instead of having to read these raw numbers of bits or bytes, we can see down here it's converted them to gigabytes and megabytes. So I can see that I've used up 3.6 gigabytes of space on this hard disk. I still have 15 gigs available, and this again is a 20% space utilization. So again, command, option, command, and option. And once again, case sensitive. If I type in a capital DF and a lowercase h and hit enter, I get a command not found. So case sensitivity is extremely important. Another issue is this. If I type that in reverse order and hit enter, it also says command not found. Anytime you are working at a command line environment, this does not matter if it's a Unix system, a Linux system, if you're at a Windows command prompt, or you're working in a router or switch at some sort of command line area. The command always comes first. If what you're typing in does not start with the command, then it is not going to work for you, because the shell, the bash shell, is looking for the command initially. That's the first part of the syntax in anything you type in a command area like this. It's always got to have the command first. Another command you'll be using in these couple of chapters is the who command. The who command tells you who is logged in currently on the system. And notice what we see here. We see J Smith 1234. Where's he logged in at? He's at TTY1. Again, TTY1 is visually or is a representation of that virtual terminal 1 that I logged into earlier. Now, the Drake JS account is logged in on TTY7. Remember that the F7, the Alt F7 key took us to what? The GUI interface. Well, so I'm logged in the GUI environment here, and then we also see this PTS1 references this GUI terminal environment. So I'm actually logged onto the system in two ways. Both when I logged into the computer as myself, that's this TTY7, and then when I brought up the terminal window inside the GUI, I also effectively logged into that environment as well. Unlike in the virtual terminal, it prompts me to log in each time that I start one of those up. In the GUI terminal, it simply passes the credentials that I've used when I logged into the system and switches and logs it in for me as it brings up the terminal window. Now, looking at the terminal window, we see here the prompt. There's some variation as to how prompts are set up. But typically what you'll see is the username of the user who's logged in, the @ symbol, and then the name of the machine to which you're logged in. In this particular instance, this machine is simply named Ubuntu, and I'm logged in as Drake JS on this particular system. We also see at the end here a $. This tells me that I'm logged in with a standard user account. And right behind this is a special symbol called a tilde. You'll find that to the left of your 1 key on your keyboard. So it would be a shift backtick key space or key on your keyboard. Again, it's just to the left of the 1 on most standard keyboards. This tilde is a special symbol that stands for the home directory of the user. So in my command prompt area, who is logged in, what machine they're logged into, what is my present working directory, which we'll talk about later, and then the $ indicates am I logged in as the root user or as a standard user.